31st, my name is Cal Goff, and with Randall Kumba, we are at Randall's house for an oral history interview for Gay Spirit Visions. So Mike, would you please state your name and where you live and how long you've lived there?
Michael Goatee. I've lived in the Atlanta area since 1976 after college. Right now I'm in a small metro area called Avondale Estates, small town inside the perimeter.
Okay. And how long have you been there?
Oh, 2001.
Okay. The first question has to do with your family background, and I'll go through what we mean by that, and then I'll ask you separately those things, because there's several of them. We want to know where you were born and where your parents and grandparents were from, the number and gender of your siblings, and one or two profound childhood experiences.
Okay.
And your partnership history. So let me go to the beginning of that and say, tell us where you were born. And
Yeah, I was born in Jacksonville, Florida, 1947, and my parents are my dad is from Savannah, and my mother is from Glenville, Georgia, not too far from Savannah. And I have one brother, David, who is just a year younger than I am.
what's his name?
David.
David, okay.
And, profound thing. My mind has been on this lately because of what's going on with my retirement career. In first grade, I was handed colored chalks to draw the holiday scene. They had figured out I was artistic, that far back. Mm-hmm. And I think I'd just seen Wizard of Oz, and I drew some killer witches for Halloween. And that's my earliest memory of doing artwork, which is something that's driven me my whole life.
Okay.
And partnership, not too many. I'm so free-spirited. It's not because I didn't want them. It's just because I'm as good with as without. Mm-hmm. But back in the mid-'80s, early '80s, I went to Boston on a vacation and met a wonderful man that moved down to Atlanta, Ken Shea, and we were together for about 5.5 years, and sadly he was one of the first victims of HIV/AIDS. At the time they didn't even know what to call it, so GRID was the first term, gay-related immunodeficiency.
Mm-hmm. Was this the early 80s, mid-80s?
He passed away in the mid-'80s. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Okay.
I have to look at the number I wrote down for the specific year, because things like that don't stick, especially if you don't want to remember them that much. But yeah, he was an early loss. Miss him a great deal. I've dated other people for some length of time and always ended it beautifully and stayed friendly. My current relationship is one of the oddest ever. I met Roy Smoot at Gay Spirit Visions, I believe it was in '96, and he was my small group leader. And shortly after the conference, Franklin Abbott had a men's group to talk about relationships, and at that point Roy asked me out for a date. And we were partners for about 2 years and realized that some of the things that were really important to both of us weren't there. Mm-hmm. But we decided to continue living together because it really worked well in the house. Mm-hmm. He liked to do things I didn't do and vice versa. Anyway, it's something like 19 years now. And so we live with his partner, and yet he and I are kind of like an old married couple with no sexual intimacy. And it's amazing how that has filled our needs for all these years. It's something I probably couldn't have invented if I put my mind to it, but it happened.
All right. talk a little bit about how you got from Jacksonville to Atlanta. That might be.
Real quickie clip notes. I got a degree in advertising in '69 and went off into the Navy for 4 years. And while I was there, I was dabbling in art, and someone convinced me that I should go back on the GI Bill and get a degree in art. I did that for 3 more years. Both times it was Gainesville, Florida, University of Florida. And on that second time there, I met a couple across the street from my apartment who were from Atlanta, and we became very close and still are in touch. And when I decided, after having lived in Washington, D.C. for 2 years while I was in the Navy, that I really needed to live in a bigger city, she suggested that Atlanta was probably just what I wanted because that's where she was from. And also my brother had gone to Emory up here. And so as soon as I graduated, I hit the road for Atlanta.
Really? Okay. And, okay. Can you describe your coming out experience?
My what?
Your coming out experience. Where that happened, when that happened, the circumstances.
It was relatively easy. During that second degree, I had a part-time job in a mall bookstore and met a woman that I was dating. And
this is in Jacksonville?
No, this is in Gainesville, Florida,
Okay.
University of Florida.
Okay.
And she asked me, now this was, in the 70s when glam rock, glitter rock, David Bowie, all of that was going on. And she asked me, she says, have you ever been to a gay bar? Well, at the time I was not out. I was not even thinking I was gay. I thought I was very open-minded being a child of the 60s, and it had one experience in college in '69 and just thought it was part of my new open-mindedness. But I was completely shut down sexually about that part and just thought that relationships with women were just sort of overblown to sell cards and candy and flowers and such and diamond rings. And so I was a little cynical about relationships. Anyway, she asked me that, and I can remember dropping my money on the floor to pay the cover charge to go into this bar. And while we were in there, I admitted to her that I had had a relationship, or not even a relationship, a couple of intimate moments with somebody at school. And she had been there before, it seems, and introduced me to the DJ there, who became my first official gay date. And we had she and I had a very loose, open relationship, and she was a few steps ahead of me towards her own coming out. And long story short, she dubbed me an honorary lesbian, which I accepted with pride, because I've never really had any negative thoughts about women. I think they're pretty amazing because my mother was so strong, I guess. But so I slowly started coming out to people because this, bisexual chic thing was going on, so it made it kind of easy. It wasn't until I had moved to Atlanta that I became a little braver about it, and certainly with Gay Spirit Visions. It had a lot to do with not only just accepting that I was gay, but just, celebrating it. I would say my first official coming out was when a potential employer was at my house while I did freelance work on a magazine. She wanted to see what I had done on the screen. I was eventually going to go work for her publishing company, and she called me that night and she said, I have a question for you. She said, are you gay? And I couldn't believe what I said. I said, why, yes, was my slip showing? And she laughed. She says, no. She said, I just knew that no straight man could have a home as beautiful as yours. So I would call that my official coming out. And from then on, I've never held back.
Okay. Tell us about any relatives or acquaintances or friends or mentors or events or experiences, and I'll go through that again in a minute, that shaped your spiritual journey before attending your first GSV conference?
Absolutely.
Relatives, acquaintances, friends, mentors, events?
Not
or
so much
experiences?
relatives. I will say that having grown up in the Episcopal Church, it gave me a lot more wiggle room to make some choices. And I could remember talking to the assistant minister. I was already in college and about to go out into the world, and I said, I have to look for something bigger. I said, there's something bigger, and I feel it, and I don't know what it is, but I have to look for it, and got his blessings on that. But interesting, while I was in the Navy in Washington, D.C., I met some incredible people that were not in the service that would shape my life for years to come. And my friends that were in Washington that I had gone to college with, they just coincidentally happened to be in the service at the same time I was, introduced me to this couple because they thought we'd click. I had just met them, and I was sitting in, of all places, the Pentagon, reading an article that really wasn't so spiritual. I don't know how it all clicked. And I had sitting at my desk having lunch, this thing that later I would learn to call it a white light experience. And then later on, Satori, or Satori. And it was profound. I felt for a split second that I understood everything, and was also aware that I knew I could not retain that for any length of time because it was so powerful. And that the rest of the day I walked around with a smile on my face, feeling confident about whatever's out there, and spent the rest of my life looking for it. I happen to feel comfortable enough to tell somebody, one of the people in this couple, about it. And he handed me a book by Alan Watts called The Book on the Taboos Against Knowing Who You Are. He said, read this. Well, it opened the door for me between Eastern and Western thought. And it was the most powerful thing I'd ever experienced. Fast forward to moving to Atlanta after that was over. And by the way, they were also the people that told me I should take my dabbling in art seriously and go back to school on the GI Bill and get the degree I wanted. Major friendships. I got to Atlanta, very quickly got tired of the disco world and the bar world. I thought, is this all we get if we're gay? I'm used to the world of rock and roll. I always said I'm a rock and roll soul in a disco world up here.
Okay.
And I had mentioned that to Ramon Noya, who told me about gay spirit visions. And it sounded...
How did you know Ramon? Do you remember?
How did I meet Ramon? I think it was through, we were doing some of the same things at the same time. I think it was called The Experience. It was one of these sort of metaphysical life improvement things. And then along with that was Body Electric. So we sensed there was something that was looking, he sensed there was something in me that was looking. And he says, I think you should go to this. And this was like maybe in August. And so like the next month or so, I'm signed up to come to my first Gay Spirit Visions conference.
Okay.
And
This is 94? No.
this would have been 94.
Okay.
And it was amazing what went on in my head, because everybody knows about that inner negative chatter. I was thinking, oh, I'm so excited about this, but oh God, I said, I'm not quite fairy enough. I'm not the old hippie person I used to be. I've been at disco for too long, and I may not be accepted, and look like a poser, and the stuff that was going on and on. And very quickly, once I got there, that was wiped out, because there was every kind of gay man I could imagine there. And that's what kept me on the journey among gay friends.
Do you remember what made you receptive to going when he suggested that you go? I mean, what was going on with you otherwise that would make you not say no, thanks, instead of, yeah.
It was interesting. For years, I was involved as the artist for Atlanta's gay raft race, the Hot Atlanta River Expo is what it was called later.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, it was fun and everything, but it was still the circuit party thing. And yes, you know, sexually it was supercharging and all that, but it just wasn't me.
Uh-huh.
It just wasn't me. I would rather have gone to hang out with a bunch of people at a blues club or something, you know, and that was, people that would enjoy that were not readily available in the gay community, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it was one of the last years I did anything with Raft Race. In fact, he was there to see how a friend had decorated a party. He was not involved in the Raft Race.
Uh-huh. And
I ran into him at one of the parties, and that's when he told me about Gay Spirit Visions, and we talked about it. So I was in this supercharged, just, you know, uber gay experience that wasn't my world, looking for anything I could find, because it's like I couldn't exactly turn back and go straight because I didn't want to. So, you know, for me it was yes, 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 this could be what I'm looking for.
And so, am I correct in thinking that the way he described what this conference was going to be jived with what you were looking for? Enough to where you said, yeah, I'll do this?
Yeah. I'm not sure about the... I think at the time I was going to the Atlanta Religious Science Group, which is now called the Spiritual Living Center. Mm-hmm. And it also opened me up to something bigger than denominational religions and all that sort of thing. So my mind was starting to click in ways that I think attracts what you need, which is part of that whole spiritual system and many others. And that's how I think what he had to say sounded like, okay, here's the answer to my question.
Okay. Do you want to say anything else about your spiritual journey or religious background that led up to GSV or that was there before GSV?
Yeah, well, after reading Alan Watts and as many books as I could find, including, I can remember being in Bethesda Navy Hospital for some minor thing that really kept me there for 2 weeks. I was reading the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, and it was all making sense to me. I read books about Buddhism, the Baha'i faith, constantly looking. The one thing that rang true for me was that I want something that speaks to me in the same way as these other religions without having to learn another language to participate. It seemed like a layer of something in the way for how I wanted to experience it. So although I accept those religions as absolutely beautiful and wonderful, I needed something that was like a direct shot to the big woo-woo, as I call it, and you know, that great experience that some know as God or Spirit or whatever. And you know, Gay Spirit Visions was kind of like a smorgasbord of pick and choose ideas. And have I answered that question, or did I get rambled too much?
No, that's fine.
Did
that's
that cover it?
Rambling is good.
Yeah.
So what were the empirical circumstances of that year, 1994? Were you were not in a relationship, or you were in one?
I was not.
Okay, and you were living in Atlanta at that time?
Yeah.
And anything else about your work situation or whatever, just around that time?
I was working at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, I believe. Could have been just after that, though. It's funny how I can't quite place what was going on at work because they seem so separate to me.
Uh-huh.
Certainly nothing from work had any great effect on my spirituality other than what I feel when I'm doing something creative.
Okay.
Which is sort of, you know, becoming mesmerized by it all, which is, as I've learned later in just a brief sidetrack, that That's when I feel closest to spirit, to the energy.
Okay. What do you remember about your first conference? If you can remember your first conference, and they all don't run together.
God.
You said you were sort of anxious about how you...
Well, I was,
what
and
you
then once
found.
I got there was the energy was just palpable. I mean, it was there was a warmth there. I saw men that were probably as comfortable wearing a business suit at work as wearing a skirt doing whatever. So it sort of opened me up to a much broader spectrum in that rainbow, and oh my gosh. What I remember the most is developing a sense of not just being okay with the fact that I was gay, but thrilled about it. That it was sort of a gift that came with a bag full of magic wands. I've often, after Harry Potter came out, I thought it was the best similar description. It's like Hogwarts, and someone taps you on the shoulder and says, "By the way, did you know you're a wizard?" I will always use that as my description of GSV. So I had no idea, you know. And so I can remember driving down the mountain after the conference and remembering, one of the things about GSV is a lot of ritual, and because of the Episcopal Church, I kind of tossed ritual out, baby with the bathwater, but I just needed to do something that the description would be when you're about to receive the sacraments in church, and they call it an outward and visible sign of an inward invisible grace. Well, I needed an outward and visible sign. I said, I've got to get my ear pierced. It didn't matter that every other young, hip person is getting ears pierced. Not many that were my age at the time were doing that, and so it felt special for me. Mm-hmm. And that's my first conference.
Okay. So let's do some math. How old were you when you went to your first conference?
I don't do math without a calculator.
Well, I certainly can't do it.
I just turned 67 in January.
Okay.
So, or I mean in December.
All right.
So
okay.
Count back.
All right. So how was this conference different from what you expected when you got there? Or did you have expectations?
I didn't.
Okay.
Only because before I moved up here, the people I was surrounded by were deliciously unpredictable. I mean, people I could count on and all that, you know, but deliciously unpredictable, which is something I look for in my life. I do remember one event that was unexpected, the drumming. And you have to understand that, you know, I've been down so many paths that seemed to have a bit of a dead end that weren't what I was looking for, and there was going to be a drumming circle. And so the inner ego part of me that wants to protect its world of crap was saying, oh, I don't want to go to that, that's just far too new agey for me, and it's just such a cliche, I just can't do it. And my cabin mate at the time said, oh, come on, I'm going to go too. He said, I feel the same way, I just want to see what it looks like. I said, okay. So this really describes how I am or was in so many ways. Here's this roaring fire, and around it are these men dancing, and I can remember some man in a loincloth with antlers that just got me going in so many levels that I can't tell you. And around that were the men drumming, and around that were men bobbing to it. And outside of all those circles was me, the observer, wanting to be judgmental. The only thing was, suddenly the beat got to me. And I remembered back to some of these books I was reading, and I began to understand what a drum circle was. And it was this outward invisible sign of an inward invisible heartbeat. It was a communal heartbeat. It was something that I began to understand was that we are all one. And certainly through the drumming and this heartbeat that we shared, it felt that way. And before it was over, I was doing every Tina Turner move you can imagine to those drums. And the last day I was up on the tower, and there was a man from, I think he was from London, and he was up on the tower, and he came over to me and says, "I saw when you got it." I said, "Well, yes, you did."
Okay. So we've already established that you have been to 24 conferences. Can you talk a little bit about how over the years you decided to go or not go, and when you decided to not go for a long time, or
Yeah.
how did you make those decisions?
Okay.
And how do you make them now?
Yeah.
What enters into whether you go or
Well,
not?
first of all, my participation became stronger and stronger as I designed and put together the newsletter, The Visionary, through several editors. And that was really fulfilling. I was actually creating something from my heart, and I had, free reign to do what I wanted to, and people enjoyed that. It's a lot of work. It was kind of the solitary work that I often get into with groups, where I'm not really working with a large number of people. There's always that solitary thing about design and art and everything. And after enough years, I was starting to get serious about my fine art. And this is really the nut of it all. And I said, I just need to clear out some time. I bought my house because I wanted studio space. And at the point, maybe 5-6 years ago, when I decided to take the plunge off the cliff and retire early to pursue this, I had some retirement savings put away, and I was not too far off from early Social Security. And suddenly I found a huge chunk of my spirit that needed feeding. It was hungry, and it enjoyed every meal, and I found myself going back out west. In '95, I went to Santa Fe, and everything, my focus on art, everything shifted out there. It's just an artist's mecca, and New Mexico. And
This was the year after your first
yeah,
conference.
it was yeah.
Do you see any connection between those two things? I mean, did anything about going to the conference, you think, enter into your decision to go there, or would that have happened anyway?
No, I think years before that, an artist here in Atlanta saw a show that I had, and she says, "You need to go to Santa Fe." She said, "It will change your mind about color." And I thought, "Oh, that's delicious sounding." And I mean, it was many years later that I decided to go. And oh my gosh, in the first few minutes out of the airport, the skies alone were just stupid. I said, "You have got to be kidding me." So
that was a coincidence that it was the year after GSB.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, you never know what's really clicking underneath, that deep running river. But what happened was, as I realized that Western art was where my love was, it woke up the inner child in me, much as GSV will do. So all the cowboy shows and the little cowboy suits, I had all of that stuff that I just loved and watched until I left for college, was awakened. And if there was ever someone that was allowed to play with their inner child and then suddenly get paid for it, this was the case. But I found my attentions out west. And I think some of the first times I started moving away from GSP was when I'd rather spend my money on a plane ticket to Albuquerque and up to Santa Fe or out to Sedona, which of course is a very spiritual place. And I found that my art was nourishing me spiritually in ways that I had never imagined. And part of the reason, too, that I wasn't as willing to go to GSV is I became frustrated. There were people that had become dear to me, very dear to me, and I looked forward to seeing them at the conference. The sad thing was there was so much activity going on, I stayed frustrated, and I couldn't spend quality time with them because everybody was involved in workshops and everything. And the potlucks have been good for that, but then, you know, they became a bit more ritualized, and that was the one chance I thought I had where you could just be with the people. So basically I felt like I had graduated with honors from GSV, and it was my time to take that out into the world and truly live it. I felt to some degree that I couldn't get much more out of it than I had for all those years that I had gone. So there wasn't any really, you know, dark, angry, negative reason at all. I still, you know, count GSV as one of the things that provided a lot of courage for me, a lot.
This is not one of the questions, but I'm kind of curious as to, and I've been curious for a long time, so I'll just ask you now this. And there may not be a simple answer, but what are the reasons you haven't moved to the West?
I am 67.
Okay.
It reigns supreme lately.
Did you think about doing it?
What?
Did that occur to you to do?
Oh, it
ever?
has occurred to me so many times. Every time I hop on a plane to come back from Santa Fe, lately, it is painful. What I would be giving up if I did was family. Roy is so dear to me, and at our age, when, you know, health gets in the way, I've got a bad back and there's some other little things that could sneak up. You know, it's old enough that I need somebody that's going to be there for me if age begins to present itself in some way that I'm not too happy about. And I'm not going to have that out there. I'm not going to have that, you know, wonderful community and support. It's a little late to build it up. You know, now if I keep thinking that if something should ever happen to Roy, we co-own the house, by the way. I added him to the mortgage. I mean, that's, you know, how important he is to me. And Avondale Estates is the most amazing little town to live in. I mean, to be close to Atlanta, still inside the perimeter, it's a huge art community there. The neighbors, I've never lived any place like this. I used to call it Stepford at first because I didn't trust it. And I love the house I'm in and everything. So as long as I can afford to take trips out there, I do get to have the best of both worlds. But there's a part of me that feels something in my soul, I don't know if I should say has been there before, or something about it nourishes me. But I'm pretty darn sure that some ashes are going to be out there when it's all over.
Okay. All right. Okay. What is one of your favorite conference memories? You've been to 24 conferences, so it's going to be hard to pick one. You can pick two.
Oh God, 1,000. But I'll tell you one that comes to mind. This is one of those bittersweet things. Sometimes I feel like I've gotten so tough that I can't cry, but when it finally comes, I cry for everything. And it's certainly not this macho kind of reason. It's just that sometimes you get a little too tough after so much loss, especially during the huge reign of the plague. I had always taken a picture of my first partner to put on the altar. And at the end of the closing ceremony, I went over to the altar to pick up the photograph, and I didn't feel this way until I picked up the photograph. And I burst into tears, and it wasn't just watery eyes, I was sobbing. And other than as a small child, I don't think I could remember sobbing like that, except for a very few times. Certainly when Ken died. But someone came over to me and just hugged me. And he says, "It's okay." And that was the most profound moment I can remember there. And strongly connected to that. And I won't get into too much detail because I haven't told this person this because I don't think it's what you would tell somebody. I had met someone online that had heard about GSV and knew somebody that was there and was very interested in it. And he decided to go and we would meet. It wasn't necessarily a sex site, so there was none of that going on, but he was a nice looking man. And so during the opening fire ceremony, he arrived and I looked up, and it's not one of those things that somebody puts a picture on a website and they misrepresent themselves. It was that in only so many pixels you can't really see what somebody looks like until they're moving. And just who all is going to see this? I wanted to get back to him.
Well, it might. I mean, it's
Okay.
conceivable.
Well, I
It's
won't
gonna be
give
a
too many more
publicly
details.
accessible thing. So,
But what really shook me was how much he looked like Ken
oh,
and acted like Ken. And as soon as we were able to actually sit down and just talk, the strangest coincidence happened without giving you the details, and he mentioned Ken's name. He knew about Ken through somebody else. And by this point, the big woo-woo was just getting weird. It was so much like being with him that I couldn't believe it. And I was not looking for another Ken. I don't work that way. I'm not looking for a replacement. That was too unique. Mm-hmm. And I can remember we were dancing and had about 3 slow dances. And I said, if I don't let you go right now, I'm not going to be able to. I never told him why. And the interesting thing about that weekend was there was something about some theme that had to do with fairies or something, and I was wearing great big fairy wings, fancying myself as Oberon. And when I got home and I thought, oh dear God, Midsummer Night's Dream, where all the wrong people are falling in love with each other. In the woods, maybe on a mountaintop. That was pretty profound, and I've never experienced anything like it. I can remember sitting at Meditation Rock and looking up and just saying, how in the world did you do this? I have wanted you to come here all these years, which is why I always brought the picture. And I felt like I got to dance with him.
mm-hmm. Wow. What are some of your favorite conference activities? What do they do there that you particularly enjoy?
God, this is probably an unexpected answer. It's not a planned activity. Sitting on the deck in rocking chairs with other guys, looking at the scenery and talking. I've had more warm memories of the one-on-one with people, especially when their spirit is nourished as it is there. I can't think, I mean, I could get in the car and immediately think of some workshop that was just so amazing, but the thing I look forward to, and again this harkens back to the idea of not being able to spend as much time with people because everybody's so busy with workshops. But I can just remember one conversation as a good example where we were talking about, I had, you know, of course, remembering my losses with Ken and all this sort of thing, and having to do a little shrink time in some Zoloft, I think, because I had lost my mother, my partner, and my best friend with 1.5 years. Mm-hmm. And certainly I found out from my shrink that I am not Superman and I'm not supposed to be able to handle that much. Oh, and buying and selling a house, so I was taxed. Mm-hmm. But we sat on that deck, and the painful subject of depression and taking drugs and its effect on your sex life mm-hmm. had us laughing. And I found that to be one of the most healing moments, to be able to talk about a subject we shared in common and find the humor in it. Mm-hmm. That rates very high above a whole lot of workshops.
Okay, what was one of your favorite, I mean not favorite, but your most memorable keynote speakers, and why?
Andrew Raymer.
Because?
I mean, I think a whole lot of people would probably say that. That man probably helped shape my notion of finding my gayness as magic. You know, here was this articulate, intelligent man talking about gay people in ways I had never heard before. And certainly he would come first. The other would be Malcolm Boyd. Whoa, that was good. I knew about Malcolm Boyd possibly as early as when I was in college, because he was the Episcopal priest that ministered to the hippies in Golden Gate Park. And I can remember thinking, oh, look, he's an Episcopal minister. How cool is that? Later on, he was participating in the anti-war movement, which, you know, I did my share of that. I said, oh, how cool, an Episcopal priest is doing that. Later on, he puts out a book about being a gay man. Oh my God, an Episcopal priest is doing that. And when I found out he was our keynote speaker, I was just supercharged. As luck would have it, talking about a meaningful year, that was also the year that Roy was my small group leader, and Malcolm Boyd was in my small group. And for our group gift, I had a big heart milagro. And if you don't know what a milagro is, they're charms that the Catholic Church out in the Southwest and through parts of Mexico and all that, little charms that you buy. If you buy a silver spine, if your back hurts, or a leg, or an animal if they're sick or whatever, and if your, you know, prayers are answered, they would go into the church and pin it onto their favorite saint. Anyway, I bought this big, beautiful silver heart. And in my mind, I remembered something about, you know, you have to give your heart away to get it back. And I never thought it would lead to, you know, meeting Roy, and that Malcolm Boyd would be the recipient of that gift. And I told him what I just told you about how meaningful it was. He says, you have been a hero of mine since the earliest. And we both had tears in our eyes.
Amazing. I think I'm gonna delete all of my past qualms about inviting celebrities to
Your what?
my past qualms about inviting celebrities to the conferences, which I had many of, but it's a wonderful story. Tell us about somebody else at a conference that you met, not a keynote speaker, but just a person that you had not met before, who's been particularly memorable for you, somebody you would not have met otherwise.
Wow. I'm trying to remember if I actually met Kim Pittman there or not, you know, because we did go back quite a far way. I think if we had met, it was just casual. And certainly David Salyer, because, you know, they had been partners, and now they're like best friends, kind of like Roy and I are. And those were friendships that endured. Certainly, of course, I'd met him before, Ramon Noya, who was just, you know, an amazing spirit. Oh my gosh, there's so many people. It's like a blur.
That's okay. You've mentioned several.
And also I got to work with David as the editor of Visionary,
Okay.
which was, he's a bit shyer than some people around others, and our working together really just clicked, and I'm so glad it happened that way because we've become good friends. My gosh. That's a tough question. I keep thinking of all these other people, and Bernie. That's an interesting thing. I did not get a lot of personal time with Bernie Moran,
Mm-hmm.
and somehow we started exchanging some emails back and forth, and had so much in common. It was just crazy, and that was during a period when he wasn't allowed to come back to the country for a while. And when he finally did, I couldn't wait to see him because we had so much in common. I had admired him, you know, and he's certainly a brilliant man, but and frankly, that was one of the first times I realized how bad it was that I didn't get to spend some real quality time with people because everybody was so busy. The whole conference went by and it just didn't happen, and I thought, I don't like this part.
You've mentioned your involvement in the Visionary already. So you did get drawn into the planning structure of GSV that way, right?
Really? Not so much.
No? Okay. Had you ever considered getting involved in the way the conferences are planned and all that, or is that not?
No,
something
frankly,
you would do?
Visionary, we were doing it sometimes 4 times a year, and quite frankly, after a time, I realized what I do. Every time I join an organization, this isn't braggedy stuff, but I end up on the board or something, and it was just all becoming so taxing. I just could not do anymore. I was reaching the point where my next lesson had to be how to say no and take care of myself. And now I was asked to join a community organization for Avondale, and I said the only way I'll join is if I don't have to be on the board or do anything. For once in my life, I want to be a paid member and watch everybody else do it. I'm burned out.
Gotcha. Talk about the background of that picture, your picture in there, and how that came to be.
Yeah. Ramon took the photograph of his small group. I wish he was in that. I wish somebody else had handed somebody else the camera to take that shot. But he took that photograph. And
we don't know what conference, right? It was just a conference.
you know, somewhere at home on my computer there are some notes about it, I think I've decided to do that. I'm pretty sure. At one point, I made a list of who we knew some of the people were. There were one or two we couldn't figure out. But Ramon and I had worked out an idea. He wanted a piece of art from me. And offered the notion of designing the lighting in my house, which is pretty much half done. My studio lighting, I've rigged things up so it works, and I may not pursue that, but and we were going to do a trade. And he had a beautiful conch shell on his dining table, and I thought one time I'm going to, because there's this heart notion that I had, and the inside of a conch shell is this beautiful shades of pink to darker and darker as it gets deeper. And I thought I wanted to do a delicious merman, you know, all in shades of blues, like he's underwater, and the only true color besides the blues would be this glowing pink inside heart. And then I saw that photograph, and just the rhythm of the arms and everything in it was, artistically, it was just elegant, and spiritually, it touched me in a way that I thought, there's the heart. And so I named it Heart Circle.
Okay. And it was his small group, or it was just a group of people?
It was his small group.
Okay.
They were doing a group hug, and he took the picture. And sadly, what came out of that, he was, I think I had already finished it or was finishing it, intended for him. And he was at a lighting conference in San Francisco, and that's when he died of a heart attack. And so, how typical of him to, in a way, give you back a gift. When you give him a gift, he had a notion to do that. And this was sort of a physical version of it. You know, you could compliment him and he would reflect it right back at you.
Neat story. What is one of your favorite small group experiences, and why? You've been in a lot of 24 smap groups, I guess, so it'd be hard to pick one, but...
It is, but I can instantly, you know, like I said, there are all these instances where if you thought a little harder, there'd be one that's just like raging to be spoken about. But the two that come to mind first, number one was the Malcolm Boyd, and, you know, because of Roy and him. And the other one was a small group with Cassandra. Cassandra is, he was definitely not your everyday gay man, but he was a genius. I mean, you know, it was intimidating in a way to be around such a powerful intellect that expressed itself in such an odd, unique way. And I was attracted to that energy and afraid of it at the same time. And he was in my small group, I found myself just having easy conversation with him, and it was delightful, and it was something I wanted. And I ended up getting his small group, which I sit next to every morning when I read my paper. And it was this huge, beautiful, white quartz crystal that was part of his collection. And besides that, I've got at least 3 or 4 of his cups, and that I'll drink from every so often just to be with Cassandra for a bit. We didn't become close, but I experienced something that I had really wanted to experience. He's a magical man.
Did you ever feel uncomfortable at a conference? And if so, what was that like, and what was it about?
Yeah, a couple of times. I think, number one, I briefly mentioned ritual, which is such a huge part of GSV, and I kept trying to stay open to that, because I do understand that ritual is a physical thing you can do to help you keep focused on something that you want to hold dear for a moment in your heart and mind. But I found that so many of the rituals weren't my rituals. And that was
So you felt like you were enduring a ritual?
Yeah,
sort of.
and I often explain to new people that are coming there, and I said, if you think of whatever's going on in the middle, and this was certainly my case, it's like this, let's say everybody's in the middle of the tree house doing this ritualistic event, and I said, if you can picture like a big round wall with doors all in it, sort of like, what are those kinesioscopes or whatever it is, where they have photographs that you look at through a slot and it appears to move. Well, doors like that. And I said, I kept sitting there and there were all these closed doors, and sooner or later this one door shows up, that one particular part of that ritual is exactly where you need to go through and become part of it. And I said, and that's what I would tell people that I thought might be put off at first, because this is such a different experience. And ask me the question again. There was
Okay.
one other thing.
We wanted to know if you ever felt uncomfortable at a
Okay.
conference. And
Oh, the
what-
other one was much more humorous.
Okay.
I was asked to participate in the opening ceremony. And part of that ritual was, I was part of a pair. There were several pairs, and at one point we were supposed to take off our clothes and exchange it with our other partner. Well, here I am, Mr. Body Issues, and I'm having to change clothes with Dancing Dolphin. And it's like, well, at least they won't be looking at me. It's all people.
Oh, God. Okay. All right. What have you taken from GSV and incorporated into your life, into your normal, that didn't used to be part of your normal before GSV?
Oh, certainly an ease and openness and a sense of humor about my being gay.
Okay.
Along with the sort of very lighthearted openness of it all. One of the quotes that comes to mind, it's from a Bible of a book I read called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway, but there was a quote in there that's by G.K. Chesterton, and it's, angels fly because they take themselves lightly. I took that to heart, and so I can enjoy a gay joke, unless it's just horrible, as well as anybody. I don't take myself so seriously that even the slightest mention of gayness from a straight person sends me flying. I would much rather be open and express who I am in a way that wins them over, rather than be combative. And I think the lightness that's in GSV and the playfulness certainly tempers how I feel about being a gay man. It inspires my confidence as well as my humor.
Okay. How does we're coming at some of the same questions at different angles, so this may sound like a repeat, but how does GSV seem different from other gay organizations that you've been involved with? You mentioned the Hotlanta thing was one of the things that you could compare it to, or other ones, if you've been involved in other gay
Yeah,
organizations.
Hotlanta, of course, is the more meat and potatoes, raw sexuality, and all of that. And although I really do enjoy that, there's just something a little more romantic in me than would want to just live my life based around what that seems to be about. Certainly there's nothing I can think of other than Body Electric isn't exactly like an organization you
Well,
join.
sort of. It's
But,
enough of
yeah,
one
that's
to
why I bring it up.
contrast and compare.
I needed that, because back to the playful thing, it added this open-hearted, fun, playful aspect to sexuality. Certainly if GSV took care of the spirit, this took care of the body, because suddenly it was no longer some sort of a competition where you had a number held up at the end of your event.
Mm-hmm.
It was a celebration.
Mm-hmm.
So if GSV celebrates the spirit, then certainly Body Electric celebrates the body as it's connected with the spirit. I love that those two meshed. Outside of some gay business groups that I joined when I was thinking about freelancing, not too many. I mean, I was part of the raft race. I mean, that was just years and years of that. But you know, that's pretty much the extremes,
Mm-hmm.
actually, the two different things,
Mm-hmm.
three different things.
And do the people in the raft race planning meetings or whatever you were involved in do things totally differently? Did they make decisions differently? The spirit of it feels differently than GSV?
Yeah. Again, it was one of those organizations that I was part of where my part of it was the solitary part of it,
Mm-hmm.
designing the posters and the
Mm-hmm.
advertising. One year I even had to design the swimsuits for the beauty contest.
Okay.
So I wasn't involved in the decision making in the same way that I was not involved in GSVs.
Okay.
That's the part I miss about doing what I do for organizations. It still becomes a solitary thing where I'm not really, you know, connecting with the people as much as I'd like.
Understand. How have the conferences changed since you first attended them? Have you seen any evolution, devolution, morphing from the early conferences you went to the later ones that you went to?
Gosh, every one is so different. I have to say one of the things I appreciated that changed was shortening the heart circle by limiting the time someone could speak for their experience. I can remember the fear when someone pulled out a book and decided they wanted to read something. It's like a filibuster.
That actually happened?
My butt won't take those chairs that long. but you know, because every conference is so different, there were constant tweaks and nips and tucks, but I can't think of a profound change, which may be part of the reason that I also decided it was time to graduate. I don't know.
Okay.
I hadn't thought about that.
You've mentioned Ramon before. Is there someone else who is no longer alive that you particularly remember with affection or otherwise? It's Cassandra you also mentioned.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And if not, that's fine. I just want to. If not, that's fine. If none
You know,
comes
like
to mind.
again, it's one of those things where it'll pop into my head later. I mean, there were so many people we were losing, and many of them weren't in GSV, so it's kind of like an avalanche of, oh yeah, they weren't in GSV, you know. So that's the way it would affect me.
Yeah. Okay. Do you see GSV in any kind of role in your spiritual development in the future, or have you graduated? You think?
Absolutely. What it did was it enabled me to enjoy the company of like-minded men that were on a search, that enjoyed sharing their spirituality rather than trying to indoctrinate. It was a place where, oh my gosh, certainly learning about what I would call neo-pagan beliefs. This lines up so beautifully. I was online and I found a test to determine what your spiritual connections might be. And it wasn't just, religious denominations or even religions. Long test with lots of questions. A lot of them didn't sound spiritual at all, just about your basic beliefs in the world. And was surprised that my score was 95% pagan. And then it sort of fine-tuned and said neo-pagan. And then if you wanted to take it a little farther, I mean, it really surprises us. Is that what they believe? My gosh, that's how I think the world works. And I took it a little farther, and as well, there are groups within that, and it was Wiccan, big time Wiccan, clear. And did I decide that I wanted to be connected with these groups? Yes, I'd certainly like to hang around people that think of the world in the same way I do, but again, it's that ritual thing. I just don't want to do it. I just don't want to do it. I just want to be around people that think like I do without having to ritualize it.
Okay, is there anybody in particular you would recommend that we interview for the oral history project for GSV? People that you feel are key to understand, capturing kind of what it's like to be part of that?
Bet this is probably on the list, but David Salyer.
Okay.
I mean, my gosh, the richness of his participation in GSV and his background is just, what a blend.
Okay.
Certainly him.
Right.
Let's see.
And we have a list of all the participants, so we can talk to
Yeah,
all of them.
yeah.
But we just want to get
anybody.
priorities.
I think of people that I have a little more in common with, maybe, and I mean, God, when I think of the hundreds of men I've run through, that just sounds trashy. I did not run through that many at GSV, as much as I wanted to.
So have we overlooked anything that you hoped we would get to, or things that have come up that didn't fit into one of these questions that you couldn't want to? The goal of the interview was to sort of capture a person's experience of how this came into their life and what it did to it. So if we haven't touched on some edge of that, please talk about it.
One thing that I think's the big picture these days is there has been an enormous amount of change in the acceptance of gay people. I'm way more comfortable about just, being out to people. I mean, even in my artistic life and everything, one of the women that is one of the, big movers and shakers at the Booth Museum, I showed up in a cowboy suit and she says, "Oh my God, are you sure you're gay?" I guess I made a good cowboy. But with today's openness, a big part of GSV for me was to rid myself of the last vestiges of shame about it. That is a huge part of what GSV has been for me. In today's environment, I wonder what the big thing would be for a new person who's already comfortably out. What does it supply them? Is it just spiritual? Is it camaraderie? Both? None? That I'm curious about. It's a different world, and I have more safe spaces, as GSV describes itself. I have more safe spaces now than I've ever had before. I mean, still there are organizations where I'm not comfortable. If the guys are all over there talking about football and cars, it ain't gonna happen, so I'm talking to the women about stuff. I think that's gonna stick around, and that's just because there's certain things we don't have in common beyond sexuality. Maybe that gets addressed sometime at GSV. I mean, it's just, but that's the big question I have for GSV is, how does it evolve in today's world. I mean, certainly there are still men that have to be in the closet that are still part of GSV. They're from smaller towns or in job experiences. And as a graphic designer, the job experience part wasn't, you know, so many people assume that you might be, that it doesn't matter if you are. So.
Okay. So we've asked the questions, or you've touched on the answers of the unasked questions. So we've got what we were planning to ask you about. But we also want to know how this interview felt for you to do. And
Comfortable.
what were you...
Other than a few things that I, you know, went blank on just because of the enormity of choices,
Yeah.
I found it pretty comfortable and easy.
Do you remember whether or not it was a question of whether you wanted to do this or didn't want to do it or reluctant to do it or happy to do it or why you were doing it or why you were being asked or any of that?
Well, I was flattered that I was asked, and why I was doing it is, as I said, I really love GSV, and my lack of current participation has nothing to do with my lack of love for GSV as much as just growing my spirit outside of it and beyond it. I mean, does that?
Whatever is true is what we wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And you know, if you had any comments about how when we interview other people, we can make it a richer experience or a more comfortable one or less jarring one or whatever.
Yeah. No, there wasn't anything jarring in there.
Okay. And you don't have to have.
You know, I never was supposed to think about my years in GSV, but I can rattle on about GSV so much. I didn't sit down and make notes and all that stuff. I sort of wanted it to be spontaneous, knowing that you can start claiming that's being 67 crap for lack of, you know, loss of memory.
Okay.
You know, I have been flaky most of my life. That's another one of those taking yourself lightly things. You know, people, who's a flaky artist. You know, I decided to own that and move on. I mean, you know, if that happens, you know, whatever's going on for me now, just because I'm old doesn't mean I'm jumping into Alzheimer. I've always been this way.
Okay.
And I just learned to love myself for that and everything else. And, you know, I want to fly with those angels and take myself lightly.
Okay.
It's just not worth getting too serious about stuff you can't fix.
And I had one thing that came up for me during the interview that I want to ask, which is not on the script, but do you feel GSV is a welcoming space for artists, or particularly welcoming one, or if there's any connection there that you feel strongly about, either that it's
certainly
too rigid or too chaotic, or, you know, if you thrived in that atmosphere as an artist also.
Yeah. I know artists have their own reputations, sometimes true or not for the stereotype certainly, but I think GSV is the kind of place where an artist can flourish. You know, maybe there's people that do workshops where gay artists get together and talk about their art. I mean, nobody's ever done that. I should have thought of that one. And I wasn't as seriously involved in my art. And on this, you know, runaway train of what I'm doing that's so wonderful, but that would have been kind of nice. I've been asked to speak at 3 art organizations about doing art. And plus, for 4 years, I hosted, I was on the board for the Avondale Artists group there, and for 4 years hosted artist coffees, which were like a guild meeting, and we'd meet and talk about our art and how we do this and how we do that. And I think it'd be kind of interesting to have something where gay artists talk about art and their spirituality, because certainly I do not worry when I'm in my studio. I don't care what's going on. I don't worry I am so plugged into the Be Here Now thing. It is such a spiritual event for me that certainly I think something like that would have a place at GSV.
Interesting. Well, thank you very much. I'm going to turn off the recorder unless you want to add anything else that we
Not a
need
thing.
to capture.
Thank you for asking.
Sure. Okay.